Karl Franz, or Karl Franz I, Protector of the Empire, Defier of the Dark, Emperor himself, and son of Emperors Elector, Count of Reikland, and Prince of Altdorf, yadi. Dear old Franz has plenty of titles, and unlike many to claim the title of Emperor, he actually deserves most of them. Son of the late Emperor Lupitol, the Nutty Fruitcake, not an official title, mind you, but richly deserved nevertheless, as he was quite famous for talking to thin air and insisting that he could see, well, various spirits and spectres hovering around trying to steal the imperial silverware, and of course bullying his favourite son Karl, whom he became quite protective of. Nevertheless, despite Daddy being about as balanced as an elephant in a porcelain shop, Franz grew to be not only a relatively sane emperor, but a downright brilliant one, rivaling the likes of Mandred Skavenslayer and Magnus the Pious. Despite his future prowess, however, it was no sure thing that Karl was to claim the imperial throne. As those of you who have watched my video on the Empire will know, the Empire is an electoral monarchy and direct succession from father to son, while far from unheard of, is relatively rare. In fact, the opening round of voting saw Karl Franz roundly defeated, with 4 votes to the 8 of his rival Boris Toadbringer, the elected Count of Midland, with the remaining 3 electors presumed to be abstaining the vote. It was generally believed amongst the electors that Karl Franz was too young and inexperienced to follow in his father's footsteps. There was also some doubts about, let's say the stability of his bloodline, seeing as his father had most definitively dived just a bit too deeply into his particular bag of mixed nuts and batshit. However, Karl Franz's saving grace came in the form of an old family friend, Count Maximilian von Königswald of Ostland, who managed to persuade all but one of the electors to vote for Karl Franz, securing him a solid victory, as he already had the religious heads of the Empire, the Grand Theogonist of the Cult of Sigma, as well as the Ar Ulrich, safely in his pocket. Crowned in the year 2502, Karl Franz's exact age is not known, and despite recent rumors to the contrary with Total War Warhammer, there is no indication in lore that suggests that he is anything other than a normal man who ages like any other man. And considering he was elected at an early age, though we do not know how early, and that he has ruled for about 20 years, we can guess that he is in his late 30s to early 40s. Being a young and vigorous lad on his coronation, Karl has kept himself very busy indeed, launching several campaigns aimed at clearing out the beastmen and marauders infesting the Empire, alongside with several tribes of orcs, various packs of bandits, and the occasional Skaven-infested burrow, and in many cases these expeditions were extremely successful, as more often than not they were led by the Emperor himself. However, perhaps his greatest achievement in this regard came with his near annihilation of a huge Norscan raiding force that had been reaving their way along the coast of Nordland. Using celestial wizards to predict the likely movement of the raiders, Karl Franz set a masterful ambush, luring the raiding fleet close before unleashing a frightening barrage of cannons and mortars into the fleet, smashing it to kindling in short order. The marauders were left with no escape route, and those of them that made it to shore were butchered in their hundreds. Tired, cold, and soaked to the bone, they were met on the shoreline by disciplined ranks of swords, spears, and halberdiers, with the Emperor himself leading the final charge that smashed through the last stubborn resistance of the Jarl and his huskarls. Additionally, amongst many other military exploits, Karl Franz also broke the order of blood dragon vampires during the siege of their stronghold Blood Keep, scattering the blood dragons to all hands of the compass, and at the Battle of Nordwin, he broke apart the Bretonnian lance formations at the head of a charge of his own Reiksguard cavalry. Additionally, he has personally defeated several enemy champions in single combat, ranging from massive orc war leaders to corrupted chaos champions, even besting a giant, although in this case he had a little bit of help from his mighty griffin Deathclaw. It is also important to note, though, that dear old Franz, while perhaps the greatest military leader of his age, is not only a man of war. Under his rule, the colleges of magic has experienced a freedom of research and growth unprecedented since the time of Magnus the Pious, and the Imperial School of Engineering prospered with many new and explosive inventions. He also essentially rewrote the Empire's laws and reorganized the judicial and governing systems of the Empire, ensuring a stable government with fair and just laws. Well, at least as fair and just as the laws in a feudal monarchy with a massive and dominant upper class of nobles can get. And, not being content with merely being a genius administrator and general, Karl also has a consummate grasp of diplomacy, having prevented a fair few wars between various elector counts, some of which were even threatening to bring about full-scale civil war, the likes of which has not been seen in the Empire since the time of the Three Emperors. And Karl is not at all afraid to play dirty when engaging in internal politics, using threats, bribes, and even magic to further his own goals. One particularly amusing example is when he sent the Supreme Patriarch of the Colleges of Magic, Balthasar Gelt, to Nordland, where the somewhat uppity Elector Count, going by the name of Theodoric Gauza, was threatening to invade his neighbouring province of Hochland. Balthasar, using his skills in magic, transmutated nearly the entirety of the Nordland treasury of gold into lead. And so, bereft of the means to pay his men, Theodoric had no choice but to call off the invasion of Hochland. Karl Franz does not pick and choose his methods. All he cares about is a stable empire, and his reputation is perhaps his greatest political tool in this regard, as while it is virtually unheard of for the emperor to unseat an elector count or high noble, Karl Franz's willingness to take unorthodox steps to ensure this prosperity of the empire has his underlings just worried enough that they do not want to test him openly. After all, even the fiercest territorial ambitions is somewhat stifled by the thought that they might lose it all, not only their potential conquest, but also any title they might hold at the moment. But no lore video on Karl Franz would be complete without a mention of his war gear, and perhaps most importantly his war steed, the mighty griffin Deathclaw. A griffin he himself raised since it was but an egg, and is reputed to be the biggest and baddest griffin to have ever lived, a fittingly majestic mount for the greatest man of his age. Griffins are notoriously fickle steeds, but if a man is capable of securing their loyalty, there are no more loyal steeds in the Warhammer world, and Karl Franz has most definitively secured the loyalty of his griffin. The two have a bond forged over dozens, if not hundreds, of conflicts, allowing them to fight as one in even the most demanding of battlefield conditions, allowing them to take on considerably larger and nastier opponents, as Karl Franz demonstrated with the slaying of a berserk giant at the Battle of Blackfire Pass. Of course, a mighty steed is all well and good, but the rider needs some weapons and protection of his own, and in these regards Karl Franz is well and truly covered, carrying the Reikland Runefang dragon tooth, crafted by Alric the Mad, a dwarf smith of quite considerable talent, despite the less than flattering nickname. A weapon of such might and pedigree that any other man would wield it as his exclusive weapon, but for the Emperor it is but a backup piece to his great warhammer Ghal Maraz, or Skull Splitter in the language of its creators, the dwarves. Originally gifted to Sigmar himself by the dwarf king Kurgan Ironbeard after Sigmar rescued him from a band of orcs, Sigmar left the hammer behind when he rode into the sunset, so to say, and while we do not know who forged the mighty hammer, and in all due likelihood it was forged by several dwarven smiths rather than any single artisan, but what we do know is that it was forged in the good old days, when the dwarves were at the height of their power, and even by those standards, Ghal Maraz is a unique item, crafted in such a way as to be impossible to replicate, and as such it is without question the most powerful artifact in all of the Empire, capable of felling even a great orc warboss with a single hit, a feat usually impossible for anything short of a cannon. But not only is Karl Franz armed to the teeth with magical weapons, he also carries the Silver Seal, a magical amulet capable of protecting against all but the mightiest and most sustained of blows. It can even block magical attacks. In many ways, the Silver Seal should be considered an even greater weapon than Ghal Maraz, as it allows its merely human owner to fight on even footing with monstrous opponents, like orcs, chaos champions, or even giants. After all, an indestructible magical hammer that hits like a cannonball is all well and good to be sure, but ultimately of little use if the first enemy blow you parry with it breaks your arm. To finish off this already rather remarkable collection of magical bling, the Emperor Karl Franz is clad head to toe in black Grumril armor, crafted at astronomic expense by the dwarves, and inlaid with runes and magical sigils to further protect and strengthen the wearer. It is even said that the suit of armor incorporates parts of the armor worn by Magnus the Pious at the Battle of Kislev, and is therefore extra resistant to the influence of the chaotic powers. So, to sum it all up, Karl Franz is one of those leaders that come around 1 in 1,000 years. A man that blends the skills of the general with those of the politician and the administrator to a near flawless extent, and equipped as he is with some of the shiniest magical items in the Warhammer world, he is able to put up quite a fight even against such rivals as Grimgor Ironhide or Manfred von Karsten, despite being merely human. As such, I think that Karl Franz is a perfect choice, and let us be honest, pretty much the only choice for the Total War Warhammer Empire faction leader. And I am sure that dear old Franz will be up to the task of dealing with even such combat monsters as Grimgor Ironhide and Manfred von Karsten, leading his armies as he has always done, from the front. I have been Arch. Thank you very much for watching this lore video about Karl Franz the Emperor. I will of course be making lore videos about all of the upcoming heroes, but I think I am going to wait for Creative Assembly to release their little video on them, just so I can make use of the miracle that is moving pictures. Until then, have a good day.